гости, започваме днешната среща. Радостен съм да ви приветствам всички вас и при всичко, разбира се, виновника за тази среща, професор Шломо Занд. За него и за неговите занимания ще дам думата на професор Николаето.
Thank you very much. I will not speak long because we are out here to see to listen to our dear guest, author of this great book and very emotional book that has its emotional reactions. And I'm saying that because just to mention that Professor Zand is guest of his Bulgarian editors, of course, Bega Kniga, and guest of our project, Emotional Content of Bulgarian National Identity. And this is one of maybe the last seminar of our project, which has had its highly estimated guests from abroad. Among them is Professor Betres from Belgium, Professor Rina from Paris, Professor Hatziosi from Greece. Now maybe I couldn't recall, but there are some other guests. And we wanted with this kind of seminars to introduce the work of our colleagues from abroad who deal with similar topics, and not only to understand what they work, but maybe to generate some ideas about how and some analogies useful for our work. So I do hope sincerely that this seminar today will be very fruitful, let's say, very useful for all of us. And I gladly give the floor to our guest. Please,
Thank you very much. Thank you to invite me to the Institute and to Sofia, the first time for me. And I'm sorry I cannot speak Bulgarian. It will be much next time. Next time. And also, I understand that not all the people understand French. Then I will continue in English, even if it's sometimes it will be a broken English because I'm not used to lecture in English. But I will make my best, and after the discussion, I will see if you understood me or not. Anyway, I'm teaching history in Tel Aviv University, not far from here. And my field is the history of Europe, Western civilization. I studied in Paris for a long time, came back to Israel to teach European history. In some moment in my life, after I got my full professorship, I decided to confront myself with Jewish, Zionist, and Israeli history. But you have to understand, it wasn't so legitimate from the point of view of the university, because I don't know about Sofia, but we don't have one department of history. We have 3 departments, completely separate departments of history. The first one is the general history, like general medicine. I'm a generalist. I mean, I have to teach only about European history. The second department is Middle East studies, history, completely separate. The third one is the department of the history of the Jewish people. Then officially, it's not my field. I have not the right to give lectures in Jewish history. But I decided, before finishing my career as a historian in Israeli culture, to confront myself with the Zionist, especially with Zionist history. I was satisfied with the works that were done. And then I decided to write this book. It was published in 2008 in Israel, first of all. I didn't know at that time that it will become an international bestseller and will be translated to 20 languages. Till now, I continue to surprise about this phenomenon because it's not easy to read. Sometimes it's so complicated, a lot of chapters is not clear. Anyway, I published it, it was translated to 20 languages, and I was happy to hear that the Bulgarian want also to translate it. The book produced a lot of hostility in a lot of departments of history in Israeli university. And there are even professors that don't want to speak with me today in the corridor of the Tel Aviv University because of this book. But there are other historians in the world that accept the book very good. In some way, I can say that this book is a kind of, I applied in some way a few theories that were developed from the 80s of the 20th century, especially in Britain. I met Ernest Gellner, for example, in the 90s. He influenced me a lot. I have contact with Benedict Anderson. I imagine that you know the names? Yeah. Ernest Gellner, that I met personally. And also Eric Hobsbawm, that also helped me to develop all of these theories about the Jewish origin. But you can imagine why the reaction, the so negative reaction of the Zionist historiographer in Israel, because saying that the Jews are a religion and not an ethnic, people, race, etc., was catastrophic in Israel. You have to know, if 70 years ago somebody says that the Jews are a race, he was an anti-Semitic. Today, if somebody says that the Jews are not a race, he is considered to be anti-Semitic. It's not a joke. Looking at the reactions, the fact that I put a finger and ask if Jewishness is not a great religion, the first monotheism in the Western world, it wasn't enough. The fact that I say that the Judaism was a proselytic religion that spread in the ancient world around the Mediterranean, and after it built kingdoms of Judaism, they took it very badly in Israel. In the Zionist historians say that I wrote a book, how we say, to cut the connection between Jews in the land of Israel. I am not speaking about the state of Israel. I am speaking about the land of Israel. A lot of historians, Anglo-Saxon pro-Zionists, like Simon Schama, you heard the name? Very popular historians living in the United States. He writes in the Financial Times that my purpose was to delegitimate the right of the Jews on the land of Israel. The fact that I say that Jews are not a people but a religion, I put on question the right of Jews on the land of Israel. But writing this book, this first book, I never thought that there is asking if the Jews are a people or a religion has nothing to do with the historical right of the land of Israel. Why? Because, till 10 years ago, I was sure that the Jews are a people that were exiled 2,000 years ago from Palestine. I was sure, as a product of the Israeli education, that the Jews are a people that were exiled from their homeland, Judea, or Palestine, or the land of Israel as it was. But I never thought in my life that the Jews has a historical right on the land of Israel, because 2,000 years is something to do, no? How come the people that were expelled 2,000 years ago, have a right on the land. If we took this logic, then the Serb has a right on Bosnia, no? You know very well, because you know better than me the history of the Balkan. Yeah? The Orthodox Christian wasn't born in Kosovo, for example. Before Kosovo became Kosovo, then they have a right on Kosovo. If we start with the idea of historical right, we're not finished to make the world very aggressive, no? Very, very violent. I never thought that the Jews, even when I thought that they are a people, race, I didn't believe that they have a right of this land after 2,000 years, because a population will live there before. Anyway, I was attacked that I delegitimate the Zionist idea of taking the land of Palestine. And then I decided, by the way, I want to mention that the first book is the first book that I write without knowing how I will finish it. You have to understand that the academic education convinced us to start to write when we stop to think. This is the idea, no? Because we have to know how to finish. Then we usually, I remember the years that I was a student, this is the basic of the education. You stop to think when you start to write. And then it's okay, you can go to your PhD, etc. This is the first book that I started to write it without knowing where I'm going. Because, for example, beginning the book, I knew that the exodus of the Jews from Egypt didn't happen because of the archaeologue, the Israeli archaeologue, that most of them convinced that the exodus, the famous exodus, biblical exodus, didn't happen, never happened. But I didn't think that the Jewish exile of the Roman didn't happen. I remember arriving to the chapter of the beginning of the Jesus Christ era. And I remember looking for books about the exile of the Jews from Palestine in 70 after Jesus Christ. Going to the library, looking for books about the exile, I never found one book about the exile. You can imagine it? Everybody in the university, between the students and also the professors, were sure that the exile happened. Because how come that there are so many Jews in the world? There is not even one research book about the exile of the Jew from Palestine in 70 after Jesus Christ. You can imagine the shock that I got. And then I ran to the specialist of the Jewish history of the antiquity and asked them, how come I cannot find a book about the exile? They said, we never say that the exile happened. And I say, but it's written in the Declaration of the State of Israel. Yes, but we never deal with it. It's not our field. You can imagine there is not one research book about the exile of the Jews from Palestine. Anyway, I was attacked very strongly in Israel, and then I decided to write a second book. And this is the second book that appeared a week ago, the Invention of the Land of Israel. After writing the invention of the Jewish people, because I was accused of putting my finger on the right of the Jews on the land of Israel, I decided to make a research, what is the land of Israel for Judaism? In this book, I developed some theories about the concept of homeland. Like my first book about nations, about the Jewish people, the first chapter of my book is dealing with the question, what is a homeland? What is, if you want, a motherland, a Heimat, a lot of names. I don't know in Bulgarian what is the name of homeland. Fatherland. Rodina, it's Russian. You say like the Russian Rodina? Yes. Okay, the Rodina, your Rodina. By the way, it's very interesting that the Zionists, that most of them at the beginning was from Russian origin, when they took the word moledet. This is in Hebrew. Moledet is Rodina. They have the image of Rodina when they took from the Bible the word moledet. Rodina, in the Rodina concept, in Russian, I don't know in Bulgarian, there is a romantic dimension, a very strong one. Even, sorry to say, even a little bit sexual dimension in the word Rodina. It was written a lot about this. The Zionists, the first Zionists in the end of the 19th century, took the word Rodina and put it in Hebrew, in a Hebrew word with all the connotation of Rodina. The problem was, I started to ask myself, if in Jewish tradition, from the Bible, the Talmud, till the modernity, there is a concept of homeland, of Rodina, in Jewish tradition. Now, we know that the concept of Rodina, of homeland, patrida, patris, in Greek, yes? You know Greek, no? Better than me. Then the patrida and patris, in the ancient Greek literature, meant in some way a lot of things that we apply today to the word homeland. Now, if you are looking in Thucydides, in Plato, in other writings of the Greek, we find the concept of a homeland there. And also, in the Roman Republic, the concept exists. I try to make an analyze what is the difference applying the word patrida, patris, in the ancient time, and also in the Roman time, and to see what is the difference with the modernity. Then it's very interesting that Plato, for example, and I'm reading it in a book about Thucydides Plato, I show that the concept of patris in the Greek tradition is only for a city, the polis. There is not a concept of homeland for all the Greek. It's only the patris. There is not a Rodina for all Greek, for all the land. There is a Rodina for the polis, Greek polis, and after it for the Roman Republic. You can find it in Horatius, you know, the famous ode of Horatius, the concept of patria. To make it very short, if you have questions, you can stop me if you want. If there is something you don't agree that about the concept, I didn't find any reference to apply the word patris or to all the Greek. I didn't find it, I looked for it. Anyway, you can find it in the polis, you can find it in the Roman ancient republic. Then you can apply it in the ancient world only a place that people physically know. You understand me? The citizens in the polis more or less knew the border of the polis. He more or less knew what is the community of the patris. In the same thing with the Roman. When the Roman Republic became an empire, the notion of patria disappeared. I make all this analysis. I don't want to be too long now. If you want me, I will later can develop this idea. What is the destiny of the concept of patria in the Western world? Because during the Middle Ages, the concept, the ancient Mediterranean concept of patria disappeared. It is more or less applied in the church for even. From Augustinus, we find the word patria, but the real patria in the Christianity is not on the earth, it's on the in the heaven. It's very interesting to see in which way it changed to the heaven from the land. Anyway, with the modernity, the first one that understood what is going to be the patria in modern times is Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Others in the 18th century didn't understand the idea of patria. Not Montesquieu, not Voltaire, not the others. But Rousseau was the first one to understand what is going to be the destiny of the word patria, patrie in France, in the modernity of the 19th and the 20th century. Now, theoretically, I think, and if you want me later, I will develop a little bit more. Exactly with the modern notion of nation, the modern notion of homeland has the two of them relationship with the notion of democracy. And I'm using democracy not it's like in the communication media, in the liberal sense of the word democracy. I'm using democracy in the initial concept that the people is the owner, is the sovereign of the state. You understand? Democracy is a state that the people is the owner of the state. Now, I think that the basic to understand what is nation and nationalism in modern times is to understand the relationship between democracy and nationality. I think there is not a nationality without democracy. I am not speaking about liberal democracy. You understand? I am speaking about democracy because there is also authoritarian democracy, in my point of view. But it cannot be a strong nationality without a kind of feeling of democracy. Now the question is, what is the relationship between democracy and homeland? Why so many people in the 20th century participate in wars as volunteers, participate in wars, in national wars, and accepted to give their life for their homeland? It's a long time it's bothered me these questions. How come that so many citizens in modern times fought for the homeland? And I came from a country, from a state, with a strong patriot feeling, in a kind of notion of a land that I cannot accept. You can understand me that I have problems with it. I was soldier in 2 wars. In one war, I was very near to be killed. I start the new book about this. I was fighting in 67 in Jerusalem. Not that I am responsible about the politics today, okay? But I was a little soldier in the war of 67, fighting for my homeland, defending my homeland. And from this day, I become more and more radical in my critique about what is a homeland. Anyway, to finish with the theoretical side of the homeland, I think the basic of these deep feelings of homeland in modern times for the land of a state, because you know, homeland can be a village in the pre-modern times. Homeland, patris, if you read Aeschylus and others of Fides, you will see that it can be applied to a little village, to a little place that you were born. But in modern times, in the 20th century, a homeland is the land of a state. The state cannot give up a kilometer of its land. People agree to fight for a matter, a piece, a little piece of their homeland. How come? Why? Why you cannot change in the 20th century a border? Even the Bulgarian knows. And I will be careful not to deal with it, but even in Bulgaria, you have problems about borders. There is not a state that didn't have problems about borders. Now, what is this deep, deep feeling about territory, national territory? Now, in the book, I try to develop theoretically the problem, but basically, I think this feeling to the homeland, putting besides romantic dimension, the basic of it is the feeling of ownership, collective ownership of the land. Now, why this deep feeling about, and you have to understand that as citizens in the modern state doesn't know physically the borders, the mission of the land. Even if when he was a child, a pupil, the education system took them to see maximum of his homeland. But physically he doesn't know what is exactly his ownership. Now I think that the deep feeling of patriotism came from this consciousness of ownership of the land. Only in modern times, only in democracies, in the large sense of democracies, I mean that the state belongs to the people. People has the feeling that the land is their own. In the pre-modern times you didn't have it. The peasant that composed most of the society before modernity couldn't have a feeling for their land, large land, like the modern citizens that has the state in principle in his hand. I mean, the ownership of the citizens of the state is the ownership of the land. This is the reason that it's developed in the 20th century, a deep sentiment not to give up even a little piece of the land. Because in the modern times, if you have a property, you are not giving the property with a good will. You know you have properties, I believe. Universities, you bought apartments, etc. No, more or less. You are not giving up something that belongs to you. In the modern times, the citizens in democracy, the land belongs to them. This is the first, not the only, reason that we have so many fights, national fights on land. There is not, I think, a state that didn't have confrontation with the other state about a piece of land. Now, I think that you don't believe that Macedonia belongs to you now. No? It's okay? I don't know with whom I'm speaking.
For some,
It's
okay. For others, it's not.
Now it's okay to say that Macedonia does.
For some of the people, it's okay. For others, it's not okay.
Okay. Okay. No, to give you example. Now, why I mentioned Bulgaria? Because I want to speak about Israel. Okay? It's interesting, the land of Israel. It's the most dangerous place, I think, on the planet. Now, the concept of the first Zionists, the guys, they invented the Jewish people in modern sense of the word people. I mean, in the end of the 19th century. By inventing the people, you have to know, they insist till now, 140 years, that Jews are a people. Because only people has a right of lands. Religion doesn't have right of the land, no? Okay? People has a right of land. This is the reason the Jew has to be a people. Now, for Zionism, they say that the land of Israel, they call it Palestine, they call it the land of Israel, belongs to the Jew. Why? It's very interesting. They started with the Bible. You know more or less that God gives this land to the Jews. No? You know, to the Israeli people? You heard about it? The Bible? First Testament? Yes. Not the Second Testament. The first one? Then God gave the land to the Jews, no? It's very interesting for the Zionists. The first Zionists were secular, atheists. They were not religious. But, you know, in some way it was it. Yes, God gave us the land, even if he is not, he doesn't exist. It's very interesting contradiction. God doesn't exist. This is the reason that we become historical subject that can make a patria, a homeland. But it's God that gave us. Even it's a doubt that he exists. It's fantastic to see in the national imagination this contradiction. God gave us the land. And God gave us also the Bible. What is interesting, I walked on the Bible, and I see there is not, like in Thucydides, in Plato, there is not a concept of fatherland in the Bible. The ancient Jews, if I can use the term Jews, in the Bible, didn't have the notion of a homeland at all. They didn't fight for the homeland, they didn't defend the homeland. There is a land, not a homeland, in the Bible. In the Talmud, it was much more important to Judaism than the Bible. Bible is not a Jewish book, sorry to tell you. The Talmud is a Jewish product of Jewishness, because the Bible belongs to the three monotheist tradition. You agree with me, no? But the Talmud is especially a Jewish production. In the Talmud, you cannot find the word homeland at all. And you have to know, in the Jewish schools, during the Middle Ages, till the modernity, not the Bible was the book. In the yeshivot, you know what is yeshivot? Yeah. This is religious Jewish schools during centuries. They didn't work on the Bible as a book at all. By the way, three categories in history read really the Bible. The first one was the Karaite. You know this Karaite? It's a kind of sect, more or less a Jewish sect, very important in the 10th century. Karaite, that say the Talmud is not a real religious book, they stick to the Bible. The second human category that read really the Bible was the Protestant. The third one was the Zionists, were the Zionists. But Jews didn't read the Bible. They read the Talmud. They studied the Talmud during centuries. The Bible is present the first time, the Torah is present in the Talmud, but not directly. They didn't read the Torah directly because God wrote it. There is not any concept, patriot concept in Judaism at all. I was surprised writing this book to discover that patriotism and Jewishness is opposite notions. By the way, Christianity and patriotism also in some contradiction. But I didn't understand at the beginning that Jewishness and patriotism is two opposite notions. Yes, there is symbiosis, the modernity between of them, but you have to understand, Judaism is not Zionism. And in the end of the 19th century, with the Jewish nationalism started to be developed, all the organized Judaism in the world was against Zionism. I am not speaking about 2 or 3 rabbis. I am speaking of the majority, full majority of the rabbis in the world, from New York till Moscow, was against Zionism. By the way, when Herzl, the founder of Zionism, tried to organize a Zionist Congress in Munich, München, in 1897, he tried to organize the first Congress in München. And then from 80 rabbis of Germany, 78 protested against the existence of this Congress in Munich. And he was obliged to move it to Basel. Fortunately. You understand, right? You are lucky that it was moved to Basel, if you understand me. Anyway, I say that Zionism is opposite completely in this level of patriotism, of the notion of homeland, to Judaism. Till the Second World War, organized Judaism, and I'm speaking about the Orthodox, the Reformists, and other sects, were against Zionism. It started to change only with the Second World War. Then the notion of the land of Israel for Judaism was not a notion of ownership. The Jews didn't think in history that the land of Israel belongs to them. In the Bible, it's written clearly that the land doesn't belong to people. It belongs to the God. The God gave the land in condition. And when the people behaved badly, he took it away. This is the basic of Judaism. All the Bible, if you are reading it, is the notion God gives, God took it. Judaism, during 1,800 years, knew very well, that the land doesn't belong to Jews. The land will be given back to Jews when the Messiah will come. Judaism is this refuse of a kind of monotheism to accept Jesus Christ. You know the difference, that they didn't accept the Messiah arrived yet. For Judaism, going back to this land is only when the Messiah will arrive. They can come to Palestine only to be buried, only to die, not to live. My grandfather, in the beginning of the 20th century, bought a ticket, bought a stone, and went to Palestine to be buried in Jerusalem. He took all the money, didn't give the money to the family. Then his memory is very bad in the tradition of my family. I start the book with this story. He is buried till now in Jerusalem. In the war of '67, when I was younger soldier, I occupied with the Israeli army the city. My father told me that his grandfather is buried in Jerusalem. He explained me where to go to look for it. I decided not to go. But anyway, I mention this story because, and it's very important to remember, Jews can be buried in the land of Israel, not to take the land of Israel. Now, I wrote this book, it appeared a week ago, and I believe that very soon it will be also criticized by most of the historians that are teaching in my university. But you have to understand that even if Israel is not a real democracy, as I try to explain in this book, because this state doesn't belong to the citizens. The state of Bulgaria belongs also to the Bulgarian Jew or not? What do you think? No? If they are citizens. But Israel doesn't belong to its citizens. Do you know it? It belongs to the Jewish people. There is 25% of the population in Israel, they are not considered to be Jews. The state officially belongs to the Jews in Bulgaria, much more to the Arab pupils that are having university. Even if they are citizens, even if they have a right to vote, basically, from the point of view of the constitution of the Israeli state, Israel belongs to the Jewish people. I mean, to Woody Allen, much more to my students. With all the respect to Woody Allen, I'm against this, and this is the reason that I don't define Israel as a democratic state. But I have to mention here, especially in Bulgaria, that it is a very liberal, for the moment, state. What I mean by it, that the fact that I can continue to be a professor in Tel Aviv University, you have to understand that it is only a liberal political culture. Okay, I think that 50 years or 40 years ago here in Bulgaria, it wasn't so deeply the liberalism, political liberalism. You understand the difference? I'm living in the liberal politics for the moment, because this week, I don't know if you heard, that Günter Grass.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about that.
The Günter Grass, 3 days ago, I think, or 4 days ago, yeah, I'm here. The Minister of Interior of Israel declared Günter Grass a persona non grata. Grass cannot put his foot in Israel now. A writer that defend, I remember when I was a radical leftist, I remember that Günter Grass defend much more than all other writers in Europe the right of Israel to exist. Anyway, today he is a persona non grata. This is the reason that I say in some way Israel started to become less liberal state than it was before. I will stop and see if there is questions. If there is no questions, I will continue as you want. Then
I would like to connect the three main problems you spoke about: identity of homeland, identity of a state, and identity of people, with that decision taken by the Israel government. Is that a concept, the decision to declare Günter Grass for his poem Persona non grata, is that a concept underlying identity of the homeland of Israel, or that's identity of the state of Israel, this declaration, or identity of the Jewish people? What is
if it relationship?
There are three levels. What's the concept for this declaration underlying the declaration?
No, it's unsane.
With what the government disagreed.
No, it's something very strange. You see, Noam Chomsky, you know the name?
Yeah.
He is also,
You ask him all the time.
he didn't got the right to come in, you know. He is also persona non grata.
Yes, I know.
And he is from Jewish origin. I mean,
Both sides.
both, yet from the side of his parents. He is a Jew. By the way, he is speaking Hebrew. They didn't let him, a year and a half ago, they didn't let him to come to Israel. Now it's Günter Grass. And if Saramago was I think also, it's a new phenomenon of declaring personalities as persona non grata in Israel. It's a new phenomenon. It has not a relationship with the deep concept of citizenship, of democracy, of ownership of the land, of ownership. There is not a relationship. It's a kind of political degradation of the Israeli state today because it's politics. It's a new phenomenon. Günter Grass is not Шломо Занд. To declare that he's a persona non grata, it's not so simple.
Have you read the poem?
If I read the poem, yes. What I think about the poem, I can't tell you. Only day before yesterday, I got, you know, my German is not perfect. Then I got the English translation and the Hebrew translation. Because in Israel, they translated badly to Hebrew. I can say that I accept completely his point of view. Not the way that he said the things. I mean, in the form, if I was Günter Grass, I wrote it differently. But basically, yes, I think that he is right. And I don't think that he is anti-Semitic. Even when he was 16, he was a Waffen-SS, you know. They started, but from 45 till now, with all the things that I read, he was against Nazism, and also he defended always, and even the poem, by the way, he defended the right of Israel to exist.
That's in the last part.
If there is questions, if not, I will continue with my second subject.
I will try to say something. Let me try to not so to stick to this Günter Grass case, and to try to find aspects in which you think that Israel is something, and Israel history and Israel Jewish history is unique, and in which aspects it's the study of Jewish event of Jewish people is could be useful for scholars in of another area as Balkans. Because on one hand we don't have such a book like Bible, which is our book, which is. But on the other hand, the processes are parallel, or even not only parallel, but copying one another.
Yeah. Now, the question of the uniqueness of the Jewish history or the Jewish invention as a people is unique, but every national history is unique. It's similar in some way, it's unique. By the way, Zionism is not the only Jewish nationalism that is based on religion. Jewish nationalism started as a secular atheist movement that, used religion as a source to imagine the community, the national community. Now, Jewish history is from one side unique, and it's also very similar to other inventions, because you see the way, if I follow the French invention of a people or a nation, they took the goal has a basic, has a source of, 150 years ago, every French pupil knew that he is a descendant of the goal. Direct descendant. As the Germans knew that they are direct descendant of the Aryan, or the Teuton, as you want. Teuton? Teutons. Now, the Jews believe that they are the direct descendant of the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew. The Bulgars are sure that also that they were at least from the 12th century, maybe for 4,000 years, there were Bulgars living in this land. Now, this is similar. The way to tell the story, national story, is different. Basically, the modern principle is to invent nations, that it's a modern phenomena. You have to create back by imagination people. I don't believe, sorry to tell you, that 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, it existed here a Bulgarian people. Because if you went from village to village 1,000 years ago, you can find the other dialect in every valley different from the other valley, the other mountain. You understand? With the level of communication 1,000 years ago, without schools, without print books, print journals, without TV, radio, and internet, you cannot build a nation. Or not a people. Then I think that to create in the 19th century nations, historians started to work on the idea of people, in the modern sense of people. Like everybody spoke Bulgarian 1,000 years ago. I think that it's very interesting to follow the dialects and to see in which time one dialect started to be dominant and started to cover the others. 1,000 years ago, even 500 years ago, I don't believe that a Bulgarian kingdom, yes.
Language also.
Imperium.
Yes, two imperiums, not one.
Bulgarian Imperium.
Two, not one.
At least.
But imperiums, kingdom, are not people. We, the historians, are working with the written words. But who produced the written words? What is the part of the ancient society, the pre-modern society that wrote, that understood to read? You have to know. Most of the information that you have as the historians came from something between 2 to 5% of the elites, okay? Of the ancient societies. Most of the people didn't read. A peasant living here 500 years ago didn't know that he is Bulgarian. He knows that he belongs to something. The Jew is the same thing. He got a religion. This was serious. The fact that he belonged to the church. But not people. I don't believe that people exist. Then it's unique. When I started a little bit to read about the history, the national history of Bulgaria, before coming here, to see maybe there is one people that exists for 4,000 years, I saw that the same legend, without the Bible or with the Bible, everybody found a myth, stick to a myth, developed a myth, and started to educate generation with this myth. It's create a consciousness, a national consciousness. Now, the fact that Ernest Gehn, Benedict Anderson, or Eric Hobson could, from the 80s, started to read differently the national histories, I think it's came the fact, first of all, political fact, that the force of nationalism in Europe started to regress a little bit with the creation of Europe. I mean, the condition to change the orientation of the critic about national history started for two things. First of all, political reason, the fact that Europe started. Secondly, I think, is the communication revolution in the last quarter of the 20th century. What I mean by the communication revolution? The fact that communication become a subject, a field in the center of our sensibilities. The level of communication in the last quarter of the 20th century changed our view about the creation of nations or people in the pre-modern times. Because when the first specialists, by the way Marxists, that wrote about the idea of nation, they consider communication as something that is marginal, and they were concentrated much more on the economic structure that is also playing a very important role in the creation of people and nations. But communication, from Stalin till Otto Bauer and Karl Renner and other specialists of nationalism at the beginning of the 20th century, they didn't notice at that time, they couldn't do it, that communication is so important to creation people and nations in modern times. Only the development, the progress of communication culture in the end of the 20th century, I think, changed the orientation. And this is the reason that we understood much better today that people were invented by modern people. I mean, people in nation. Now, if there is questions, I will answer. If not, I want to...
I have a question.